Welcome to Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone in the Libertarian Institute. Today, I am joined by Peter Schiff. He is the host of the Peter Schiff Show and author of How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. We'll be discussing that today. He is also the founder of Schiff Gold. Mr. Schiff, I know that you have a number of organizations that you work with. Where is the best place for people to go to get an idea of where you work and where they could get investment advice?
Well, certainly they can start making a habit of listening to my podcast. I do, typically one or two a week at shiffradio.com. Also on my YouTube channel or any of the platforms that have podcasts, you'll find the Peter Schiff Show. People can listen to that. Start following me on X. I post quite often on that site. I'm on all the other social media sites, but I tend to be more active or the most active, other than YouTube, on X. But if you want to be a client of mine, if you see the world the same way I do, and you want to protect yourself against some of the troubles that I see coming, but profit for some of the opportunities, you can become a client of my asset management company, Euro Pacific Asset Management. And you can also become a regular buyer of gold and silver. I have a company, Schiff Gold, where I help people accumulate physical gold and silver. Good day to do that now. Gold, silver down with the Trump mania going on. So it's a good opportunity to buy some on sale.
I read this book about 15 years ago, I want to say, and I absolutely loved it. I'd love to go over your thesis, How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes. On page 11, you say, the simplest definition of economy is the effort to maximize the availability of limited resources, and just about every resource is limited, to meet as many human demands as possible. With this definition, why are some economies wealthy and some economies impoverished?
Well, the best way to maximize the value of scarce resources is through a competitive free market, where you have the profit motive and competition that guide the allocation of resources. But when you have government in the way, or in worst case, where you have a centrally planned government, authoritarian economy, where you have just a group of people who are trying to make these decisions as to where resources and land, labor, and capital should be allocated, you don't have anywhere near the type of efficiencies that you get in a free market. And so you don't have the rising living standards. So the freer markets are, the more prosperous the people are going to be, because you're going to have the most efficient use of the limited resources you have, and then therefore you'll satisfy the most human desires.
The general thesis that I get from universities, academics, Hollywood, progressives, is that this free market is beneficial for rich people exclusively, for the owners of capital. Is that true? And is there another side to this equation? Do free markets also benefit consumers and the masses?
Yeah, well, it's actually, the other way around. It's the masses that benefit the most from capitalism as a group. Yes, on an individual basis, if I come up with a product that a lot of people want to buy because it makes their lives better, right? I invent something and people want it, right? Because no businessman forces the customer to buy their product. They buy it because they think their life will improve if they have it, right? So if I come up with something that really helps people, I can get rich by doing that. But if you looked at the collective benefit of all of my customers, yes, no one customer has made as much from my invention as I have. But collectively, all the customers have benefited more than I have. And so that is the beauty of capitalism. And that's the Adam Smith invisible hand. I'm a capitalist. I want to get rich. Well, how do I get rich in capitalism? Because, I've got to figure out what people want and find out how to provide it to them better and cheaper than somebody else. And to the extent that I can succeed in doing that, I can get rich. But I got rich because I enriched everybody who voluntarily did business with me, who bought my products, who, used my services. So yeah, you could always point to the rich guy that made a fortune inventing the better mousetrap, but you ignore all the people that are now trapping mice. That you can look at all the big inventions. Yes, Henry Ford made a lot of money with the Model T, but look at how many people were able to afford automobiles that had no means of transportation. Even though there were horses, I mean, horses were very expensive. Not only were they inefficient, you had to be pretty rich to have horses, but you didn't have to be rich to buy the Model T. What about Edison and electricity? Yeah, he got rich, but people didn't have to use candles anymore. I mean, how much did the world benefit from electricity? I mean, yeah, Steve Jobs got rich with the iPhone, but God, I mean, how many people would even give up their iPhones? How much would you have to pay somebody to? I mean, it's the most important thing in people's lives. There are millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people. You know, what if I cured cancer? I mean, yeah, I'd get rich, but what about all the people who don't have to die from cancer because I cured it, right? You can always point to the guy that got rich doing something really great, right? And resent that person, be envious of that person. But in an economic system where you can't get rich solving problems, you don't solve problems, right? Why do you think the Soviet Union never invented anything? They never, I mean, they were always starving, right? You waited in line for hours just to get stale bread. Nobody waits in line for food in America because the farmers make sure that we're fed. Go to a supermarket, right? Look at all the various kinds of bread you have to choose from. That's the free market that put that bread on that shelf. When the government is in charge of putting bread on a shelf, the shelves are empty. So, the profit motive, it works beautifully. I mean, Adam Smith laid this out, in 1776. It's amazing how many people still don't understand a concept that is so old.
Yeah. So the logical fallacy that they're engaged in is they only look at one side of the equation. They just look at. I remember reading Cornelius Vanderbilt lowered the cost of steamship travel from $7 to 6 cents. And Vanderbilt is constantly vilified in American textbooks as the evil, greedy, self-interested capitalist, as if the politicians are not self-interested, as if voters aren't self-interested.
Yeah, and then go to New York. Look at all the things that Vanderbilt did for free. Apart from improving people's lives, most of his money, he didn't even spend it on himself. These guys, the so-called robber barons, I mean, they made a big deal about Rockefeller, Standard Oil, but look at how the price of kerosene collapsed. I mean, the customers didn't complain about Standard Oil. No customers complained. It was the competitors that complained because they couldn't do the job as well. Same thing with Alcoa Aluminum. They broke that up because the prices were too low, but the consumers were having a great time. All these, so-called robber barons in the Gilded Age, yes, they got rich, but the economic growth that the country experienced during that time period has been unsurpassed since. And you can only imagine how much wealthier we would be today with all the technology that we didn't have, in the 1880s and 1890s. But if we had the government we had in the 1880s and 1890s, no income tax, no Social Security tax, no Medicare, none of the government was tiny back then. It spent maybe 1 to 2% of GDP on the federal level, not 24, 25. The states barely spent any money. We didn't have all these rules and regulations that are encumbering our economy now. So you can almost imagine, how wealthy we would be if we maintained that same level of economic freedom. But it was this ideology that somehow we have to punish the successful. We have to punish the rich because they're greedy. And like, if one person has too much, it must be because other people have too little. Right. But the reality is, that the limiting factors, right, is supply. It's not demand. The demand by definition is unlimited. So how do you grow supply? Well, it's the capitalism that does that. It's the free market that produces abundance. The government produces scarcity.
Yeah. And even today, it's still competitors who hate their other competitors. It's the old media outlets like CNN saying, we might need to regulate social media because people are getting false information on this. We might need to regulate them. Meanwhile, people love social media. That's why they use it. That's why they're constantly on it hours a day.
They want to try to break up like the search engines like Google. Google's free. How are they? I mean, I don't pay anything for it, but obviously they
Google
say, well,
Maps is
they
amazing.
get to use your data. All right, whatever. I mean, and when people are upset that businesses, I don't care if businesses have my data. What are they going to do with it? They're going to look at my data and try to figure out, what is this guy like? What is he interested in? And how can we bring these things to his attention that we think he might like? I mean, I don't like government having my information. That's what I don't like, because government can do bad things with my information. They can take the information and try to use it to harm me, because the government has the force of law. They can put me in jail, right? They can do all kinds of bad things to me, and I have, no way to stop it. A businessman can't do anything to me but offer me a deal, and I could reject it or accept it. And I'm only going to accept the deal if I think it's in my advantage. So sure, I'd rather have ads. I'd rather have advertisements for things I might be interested in than things I couldn't care less about. So I don't care if the search engines have my data, because it's just going to help me find the things that I need easier. But the people who want the government to break up Google are other companies that have search engines that aren't as good and the people aren't using. It's like when you can't win in the marketplace, you try to get the government to help you. I mean, that's like, you have all these people that think, oh, monopolies are bad. If the bad monopolies are the ones that exist because government keeps out the competition. In a free market, if somebody can somehow monopolize a business, it's because he did a great job. And the only way you're going to stay a monopoly is if you keep doing a good job. And so I don't need competition for the sake of competition. I need competition to get low prices and high quality. And if I can get that with one provider, well, then that's fine. And people say, well, if you let somebody get a monopoly, then the next thing they know, they're going to jack up the prices. No, they're not, because then they'll lose their monopoly. The way they keep their monopoly is they get the government to keep out the competition by requiring, a license or limiting the competition or other kind of, barriers to entry that are erected by governments. And that goes back, back to the king and the queen, where you wanted to do something, you would get some kind of royal license to do it. And if you didn't buy that license, you couldn't do it, right? You'd get a government granted monopoly. We broke away from that in America. Nobody had a monopoly, I mean, yeah, we have a system of copyrights and patents, but that's not, really a monopoly. I mean, you do have, some protections to incentivize people to spend a lot of money developing new ideas and give them a period of time where they can recoup their investment. But, those aren't monopolies.
Yeah, it's amazing how they'll say things like rich people are bad, not differentiating people who get their wealth through the voluntary sector or the Vladimir Zelenskys of the world who get it through the coercive sector. It's like this never occurred to them. That was one of the great lessons I learned from Walter Williams in his book, Race and Economics. He goes, historically, the only way to amass wealth was to conquer, steal, and enslave. It was
Yeah,
capitalism that made it. So
he
you
was a great
couldn't get
guy.
money unless you created wealth.
Yeah, he was a great guy. Unfortunately, we lost him a few years ago. Yeah, I mean, I read his books when I was young. And I always liked the fact too that he was an African-American economist, because he was debunking, and he was very on, he stayed on how the State Against Blacks, like, was one of the first books that I wrote. And he was a real defender of liberty, but he showed how the left was selling out African Americans and entrapping them in poverty with all these programs. He did a great analogy on against the minimum wage and a lot of other things, and occupational licensing laws that were really disproportionately affecting the African Americans. But it's very interesting that everybody wants to act, oh, there's greedy people in business, right? Like Kamala Harris, oh, those grocers are gouging prices. These greedy grocery store owners are sticking it to the customer. But, what about the greedy people in government? That's where you get the most greed. Like they don't care about money. The people that work for government, they're all a bunch of saints. They're there out of altruism. They don't care about, no, they want to make money too. They just want to make it through the government, where they can force you to give them your money. They don't have the ability or the skills to earn the money honestly. So they have to use government force. And a lot of these government officials take bribes. They take kickbacks. I mean, look at Joe Biden. Look at his whole family was on the take. Right? You don't think the Bidens were greedy? They just use government as an instrument to enrich themselves as opposed to the free market. And, workers, I mean, yes, employers are greedy, but so are their workers. They're not showing up for free. They're not, they want a paycheck, right? I mean, yes, everybody wants things. There's nothing wrong with that. The beauty of it is when you're greedy in a free market, everybody wins. When you're greedy in government, only the government wins and the people lose.
So is that the great lesson of history, that the free market is just channeling this inherent self-interest we all have to provide goods for the masses? Is that the great economic lesson of history?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, all you have to do is look at the examples. Look at East and West Germany, North and South Korea. Take a population and cut it in half, and just have a lot of government on one side and a lot less government on the other side, and then take a look. Look at how they do, right? Because everything else is the same, because it's the exact same culture, right? It's just the level of government. And look at all these, look at Cuba, right? Castro comes in there, this is going to be this great revolution for the people. And look at how the people have suffered. Where's the utopia that he was creating? Communism. Right? Let's get rid of the rich people, get rid of their greed, and we're all going to be better off. No, we're all better off because of their greed, because of their wealth. In fact, they got wealthy as a reward for doing good things. I mentioned earlier about curing cancer. Don't you want somebody to get stinking rich curing cancer? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that would be great. If you're going to say nobody should get rich off of cancer, it's horrible. People are dying of cancer. Nobody should get rich off of other people's suffering. Let's make it illegal to get rich on a cancer cure. Okay, fine. Good luck getting a cure. No one's going to cure it. I want the guy that cures it to get really rich.
When it comes to why prices rise and why prices fall, of course, they constantly pin it on greed as to why prices rise. But there seems to be a real correlation between things the state funds and things that go up in price. They fund the military. We spend tons on the military and quality doesn't improve. College, housing, healthcare, since Medicare, Medicaid, and the ACA have all gone up in price. Is there a correlation between the state subsidizing something and prices going up? Or
Of
are they just
course.
saying, we knew the price was going to go up and that's why we came in to help you guys?
Yeah, look, it's not a coincidence. Look, where do prices go down? Technology. That's where the government's not involved. And even in medicine, where is the government not involved? Cosmetic surgery, because, you got to they don't subsidize that. That gets cheaper, right? LASIK surgery for your eyes is cheaper, but, breast implants or, whatever, all this stuff in real terms is cheaper than it was 20, 30 years ago, because the government isn't really involved in that aspect of it. But where the government is involved, education has got to be the best example. I mean, housing is a good one too, but education is probably the best, because the government came in, and before the government got involved in education in the 1960s and higher education, it really wasn't that expensive. Like my dad, went to college, in the 1940s, and his friends went to college. And my dad didn't grow up in a wealthy neighborhood. He grew up, lower middle class neighborhood. So he had to get a job while he was in college. So he worked his way through college, and that was a common thing to do. You just worked your way through college. If your parents were upper middle class, probably they could pay your tuition. It wasn't that expensive. But if your parents were relatively poor, just got a job. My dad just got a job, working in, waiting tables in a lodge over the summer. And that was all he needed. That paid for everything, his summer job. And that was standard. Nobody borrowed money to go to college. It all started in the 60s. And 70s, really. And that's because we lowered the voting age to 18 because of the Vietnam War. And so 18-year-olds now, what are they doing? They're going into college. And so how did politicians pander to 18-year-olds who are about to go to college? Hey, we'll give you a loan. You don't have to go to work. Don't waste your summer working a job. Just borrow this money. And I know you can't borrow it on your own because, you're high risk. You don't have any collateral. We'll guarantee it. Go to the bank with a government guarantee. They'll loan you all the money you want. Have fun. Enjoy your summer. pay it back later when you have a better job, right? That was the deal. So everybody voted for it. But now the colleges were like, oh, these kids can get all this government money to go to school. Let's raise our prices, because they don't care. They're just borrowing the money from the government. And they start like really, spending more money to try to advertise. Oh, let's spend a bunch of money on a new gymnasium, right? And all kinds of stuff. And they kept raising their prices. And then the government keeps raising the subsidy and the loan guarantees. And the prices just started to explode because of all this government involvement. And what's crazy now is now all the Democrats, oh, we got to forgive these student loans. This is so horrible. Well, why do they have these student loans? If it wasn't for the government, nobody could have taken out a student loan. Although now, Obama, and I was one of the people that said this, what Obama did is he privatized a lot of it. He said, look, we got to take the profit out of student loans. We got these banks that are making money. Let's just have the government issue the loans directly, which they started doing, direct government loans. And again, that just made tuition go up even more. But now that they're talking about forgiving the student loans, that's pushing up prices even faster, because now if people don't even think they're going to have to pay back their loans, well, they'll borrow even more money. Who cares how much I borrow? I don't even have to pay it back. And so the college are like, this is a great deal. I mean, pretty soon they'll start giving free cars with your tuition. I mean, no one's going to care. And now they have all kinds of caps where, after 10 years or, whatever you haven't paid is forgiven. I mean, so the government is the reason that education is so expensive. And it's the reason that the degrees are worthless. That is the irony. They have made a college diploma extremely expensive to get, but then worthless to have. Because when my dad went to college in the 40s and 50s, if you got a college degree, all right, that set you aside, because 90% of people that graduated high school didn't go to college. They just went right into the workforce. But now everybody goes to college. So how do you special because you have a college degree? Yeah, everybody's got a college degree. They used to say you got to go to college because if you don't get a college degree, you're going to end up waiting tables for a living. Now they say you got to go get a college degree because you need a college degree to be a waiter. Right? Yeah. I mean, it's so ridiculous. Most of the things that people go to college for, they don't even need it. I mean, they just go because the government provides the subsidy. There are a lot of people that barely made it out of high school. They go to college and they're taking remedial math. Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. They go to college and they need remedial math, remedial English. I mean, if you don't understand basic math and English by the time you graduate high school, college is not for you. Go get a job, learn a trade. That is the problem in America. Look how much you have to pay a plumber, an electrician, right? We need more of those. And you don't need a college degree for that. You know how you learn how to be an electrician? From another electrician. You go get a job, when you're young, and you work for an electrician at a low wage, and he shows you how to do it. You learn from somebody who's actually doing it.
And that's what I hate most about the minimum wage, is that it stops people from getting their foot in the door to getting on-the-job experience, which allow them to demand a higher wage in the future. It's why such a small percentage of people are paid minimum wage, because once they get in, they get on-the-job skills, and then they're able to play employers against each other by having them compete for their services. I remember in college one time, they had said, the country's racist, black incomes are here and white incomes are here. And I said, Japanese Americans and Vietnamese Americans have higher incomes than whites. How do you explain that? Apparently, no student and no teacher was familiar with that at all. They had never heard it. The professor at Arizona State University said, where did you hear that? And I go, that's the Bureau of Labor Statistics who collects all these numbers. And
right,
it's
but
Indian Americans who are at the top.
Blacks from certain countries do very well in this country. Is it Nigerians or I forget, but so it's like, well, so you tell me that people are just are racist against some blacks, but not other blacks. I mean, it's like, it's not racism that is the problem. I mean, there are racists more so probably in government, but in the free market, it's, even if you are a racist in the free market, you're not going to not hire somebody who's good because they're black or Hispanic, because if they're good, you're going to make more money hiring them. See, it's like people think people are greedy and they're racist. So if a greedy racist, why would they pass up, a good worker? And of course, they're not going to, not let African-Americans, eat at their store, at their restaurant. Don't they want their money? Don't they want to make more money? When we did have discrimination, it was because the government required it. The reason that you had to have separate, facilities and all this stuff in the South, Jim Crow, the government passed those laws. It wasn't the free market deciding that we don't want blacks at the lunch counter. The government passed those laws. The government did all that. The free market would have eradicated it. Anybody in a free market who discriminates is going to go out of business. That's the reality of it. The irony, though, is that you've got all these anti-discrimination laws on the books that cause business owners who aren't racist at all to discriminate against blacks, against women, against the handicapped, because they can't afford to take the risk of hiring them because they can get sued 8 ways from Sunday. Not only by the employer, right? You hire somebody, you hire an African-American, he doesn't work out, which often happens. You fire him. Oh, I got sued. Oh, you fired me because I'm black. Well, no, I didn't. I fired you because you didn't do a good job. Yeah, well, I say it's because I'm black. And now the lawyer sues me and he shakes me down for a settlement. But what if I hire a black guy and I happen to have a white guy working for me? And the white guy, who's my employee, maybe he's a racist. I didn't realize it. I don't know. He says something that offends my black employee. And now I get sued because I'm the employer. So you have these small business owners. They can't afford to get sued. So they hire the people least likely to sue them. That's white men. Because what are you going to do? You discriminate against me because I'm white? Try telling that to the jury. Or, so it all backfires. Like you said, the minimum wage. The minimum wage has got to be the stupidest law ever created. If you were going to think of a law that could harm people the most, it would be the minimum wage. Yet almost every country has one. Not every country. Singapore doesn't have one. They don't have an unemployment problem in Singapore. But if you think about what a minimum wage law is, the minimum wage, it's not about the business owners. It's about an individual. So what the government is telling an unskilled individual, let's say the minimum wage is $15 an hour. There's now a law that says that I have to convince an employer to pay me $15 an hour. And if I can't get a job for $15 an hour, it's illegal for me to work. So what do I do if I don't have any skills and I just can't deliver $15 worth of value to any potential employer? What are my choices here? I can't get a job. So maybe I'm going to have to go into crime because you've made it illegal for me to work. And people say, well, we don't want them to exploit you. Well, how are they exploiting me? Let's say I'm willing to work for $10 an hour, but the minimum wage is 15. And the employer is willing to pay me 10. Why can't I accept that job? Especially younger people. A lot of people will say, well, how do you support a family on minimum wage? Well, you're not supposed to have a family if all you can earn is minimum wage. The whole idea is, what if I'm 15, 16 years old and I want to get a job after school? What are my skills? A lot of times the most valuable part about a low entry job is not the money. The money is secondary. It's the skills that you acquire on that job and the better jobs that you're able to get later, right? You got to get on that job ladder. You got to get on that first rung. And that's, back in the days with apprentices, people would work for nothing. In fact, people pay to get skills. People pay to go to school. And so I can pay high tuition to go to trade school, but I can't get a low paying job from a tradesman. Because if you want to learn a trade, you're going to learn it better from a guy who's doing it than someone who's teaching it, right? That's the old saying, those who can do, those who can't teach. So I don't want to learn a trade from a teacher. I don't want to pay a school to teach me how to be a plumber. I want to get a job from a plumber and let him teach me, right? But no, that plumber can't afford to hire me anymore because he has to pay me too much money to teach me how to be a plumber. So instead of getting a low-paying job for a plumber, I pay a fortune and go into debt to have a school teach me how to be a plumber from a guy who couldn't plumb, who couldn't hack it as a plumber. So he ended up teaching plumbing in some school. So it's all asinine. We got to get rid of the minimum wage law so that people can get jobs. How many people have gone from the mailroom to the boardroom? You could look at situations where people have literally worked their way up from the bottom to the very top. Well, had there been a minimum wage back then, that may never have happened. they never would have gotten that job. I mean, look at all the jobs, when I was even a kid, you pulled into a gas station, there was like 4 or 5 people that showed up there, wash your windows, check the air under your tires, do you need oil for your car? They pumped it, all kinds of stuff. And they barely got paid. You know what you did? When you bought your gas for $2, it was $2 for gas and you got 25-cent change. Keep the change, buddy. That's, but a lot of these guys, they ended up being mechanics because all these gas stations had mechanics. And between fill-ups, they would learn something about automobile mechanics. They would become mechanics. Some of these guys owned their own gas stations. Maybe they owned a chain of gas stations, but they started off as pump jockeys, but now you go into a gas station, there's no human beings there. You pump your own gas. If you want air on your tires, you got to go over there and pay some money and put your own air in. You got to take a squeegee and wash your own windows. All these jobs were eliminated by the minimum wage, So the government has done so much to destroy opportunities for young people and the benefit of older people to have those services, right? It's nice when people are doing stuff for you and you don't have to do it yourself,
I want to get into the second part of the book, why it crashes, meaning the economy. What causes the boom-bust cycle?
Well, the boom-bust cycles that have, been pretty typical in, the fiat money age in particular. But what happens is the government comes in, one of the important prices in a market economy is an interest rate. Interest rates are a very important price. And they should be determined by supply and demand, like every other price. So the supply is the amount of savings that there is. And the demand is, coming from all areas where you want to borrow. And if I am saving a lot, I am making capital available, but I am also deferring my consumption. I am sending a message to the markets that, hey, I'm not going to consume today. I'm going to put my money in the bank. I'm going to invest it. And I'm not going to consume it till later. And so there's capital here to finance investment that will, pay off later when I want to spend my money. If the savings rate is low and then interest rates are going to be high, it's because people have a time preference for their money right now. And so there isn't a lot of money available to make long-term investments because, people want stuff now. They don't want stuff in the future. So you have all this stuff. So if you have, interest rates will be high or low based on individual time preferences, whether people want to save their money, whether they want to spend their money, and then how much savings we have to allocate, how high the interest rates has to be to allocate it. And then, when interest rates are high, not as many projects can get funded. Only the very best projects can compete and pay those high interest rates. But you get an efficient allocation of capital and production and all that. What happens is the government comes in and we're going to artificially lower interest rates. We're going to take interest rates and suppress them. And it screws the whole thing up. Now, the markets behave inefficiently because investments are funded that really shouldn't be funded because people's time preferences are not reflected in those low interest rates. They're low for artificial reasons. And so you get overinvestment, malinvestment, the Austrians call it Mises. And so the economy gets really screwed up. Resources get misallocated, you get bubbles, asset prices get bid up, but none of it is supported by the fundamentals. Eventually, interest rates have to rise because all this cheap money creates inflation, prices go up, rates have to go up. And then when that happens, it exposes all of the malinvestments and everything crashes, everything collapses because it's unsustainable. And so then you get the bust. Like in my book, I used an example. I didn't use it in that book. I used it in The Real Crash. I use it as an example of like a circus coming into a small town. And I said, let's say a circus comes to town. They don't really have circuses anymore, so maybe people don't get it. But, the circus, there's a lot of people, right, that in a traveling circus, Ringling Brothers, Bodmer Bailey, they come in. And all of a sudden, maybe there's a couple of hundred people in this town for the circus. Well, while they're there, they start eating in a restaurant, right? And now the restaurant owner is crowded every day. And he's like, oh, look at this. Man, my restaurant is booming. I need more space. I need to take more space. I need to hire more waiters. I need more cooks because my business is booming, right? He doesn't realize that this is a circus. They're going to be gone, right? They're only there. So the circuit, now he's got a boom. Then, after he expands, they pull up their stakes and they move to the next town. And now, where are all my customers? Shoot, I got excess space. I don't need it. I got too many waitresses. I got too many cooks. I got to fire some. I don't need all these people, right? So you have the boom and the bust because the waiter, the owner of the restaurant misinterpreted that spike in demand as some real thing that was going to last. And that's what happens on a huge scale when the Fed artificially suppresses interest rates. They lower rates, they print money, they buy bonds, and they send false signals all over the economy. And you get this artificial boom that sows the seeds of its own bust. The problem is every time the central bank causes a boom, when we get the bust where the free market is trying to fix what the government broke, the government comes in with more stimulus. And they say, oh, look, all this stuff is crashing. We need to prop it back up again. No, they need to let it crash. It's crashing for a reason. We got to go reallocate. But they keep blowing bigger bubbles. But every time a bubble pops, they need more and more cheap money to reflate it. And now that's why I've been saying we've got the mother of all bubbles now. Massive misallocation. And now we got Donald Trump as president. And all he's really going to do is try to blow more air into it. And everybody thinks it's going to work. It's not going to work. It just makes it worse. The underlying problems will get worse if we just encourage more excess consumption. If we cut taxes so people can spend more money, we're going to have bigger budget deficits, bigger trade deficits, and our savings rate is going to stay down, and it's just going to exacerbate the imbalances that ultimately lead to the next crisis.
So the general consensus on the corporate press, at least, and the economists who get on the mainstream media, they'll say that inflation is when prices go up. Do you agree with that? Or are you saying inflation is an increase in the money supply, which often results in higher prices or inevitably results?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it is. And it's not my definition. That was the definition. I mean, if you actually look at the word inflation, the root there is inflate. And so inflate means to expand, right? If you inflate a balloon, the balloon expands. Think about prices. Do prices expand? Can you expand a price? No. Prices can go up and they can go down, but they can't expand. What expands? The money supply. That can expand. You create more money. You've expanded the supply. Deflation is a contraction of the money supply. So inflation is when the money supply is going up. Deflation is when the money supply is going down. Now, when the money supply is going up, how does that impact prices? Well, if I have more money to bid up prices, the prices will be higher, right? Because the money is just how you buy stuff. And the more money there is, the more demand there is. So the higher the price is going to be. If you take money out of the economy, if there's less money, well, then prices are going to fall. So prices rise and fall as a result of inflation and deflation. But the reason the government changed the definition, and with the help of academia and, Wall Street and everybody, is that the government is the cause of inflation because only the government can expand the money supply. Now, it also gets done through the banks, but the governments are basically in control of that. So the government is the creator of inflation. Now, when the government creates inflation, prices go up. People don't like it, right? Obviously, this whole election was decided because of inflation, because of higher prices, right? Inflation pushed up prices. So the government wants to blame others for inflation. They don't want to accept responsibility. So if you change the definition and you claim that inflation is rising prices, well, whose fault is it? Whoever raises prices. That's how Kamala was able to say it's those greedy grocers that are raising prices. Biden was saying Putin price hikes. Putin is raising your prices, right? The labor unions are raising your prices. No, the government is raising your prices by expanding the money supply. The market just responds to that. And then the government says, well, economic growth causes inflation. The economy is growing, so you buy more stuff and that pushes up the price. No, it doesn't. In fact, economic growth brings prices down because you have more supply. You expand the supply of goods, which lowers the price. You can have inflation without prices going up, because let's say prices would have gone down by 5%, and the government creates 5% inflation, and so prices are the same. Well, there's still 5% inflation. I got robbed of my benefit of a lower price. Now, the government actually, ironically, and economists too, they try to claim that, well, that's a good thing because if prices go down, that's a complete disaster, right? We can't have falling prices. And they go back and they say, look, we had a depression and prices went down. And so we can never have falling prices or we're going to have another depression, which is like, saying, look, we have wet streets. That must have caused the rain. We have to keep the streets dry so we could stop the rain, right? I mean, prices went down because of the depression. They didn't cause the depression. And in fact, had prices not come down, the depression would have been worse, right? If they had gone up. But they have this asinine idea that if prices go down, nobody will buy anything. And it's like, well, yeah, but what about cell phones? What about television sets? I mean, all these things get cheaper. We don't not buy them. I mean, I know, if you buy a new phone, that if you just wait an extra year or two, you'll be able to buy the same phone cheaper, right? Why don't you wait? Because I want the phone right now. I don't want to wait. There is a premium that you pay to have something now. The only time you don't buy something when the price is high is because you can't afford it. And I have to wait for the price to go down so I can buy it. I can't afford it now, right? And so because prices of cell phones have gone down so much, that's why everybody has them. When they first came out, very few people, only the rich people bought them because they were too expensive to buy. Now they're cheaper and better thanks to capitalism. So falling prices are a good thing. It doesn't hurt businesses. All business owners, people say, oh, the businesses, they want to raise prices. No, they're actually always looking for ways to lower prices because that's how they get more sales. And they want to lower their costs so they can lower their prices and sell more stuff. It's about volume and margin. So if I can sell more stuff, cell phone companies are making more money selling phones for cheaper prices than they made 20 years ago when they were a lot more expensive, right? Because they're doing it on volume. So businesses are always trying to cut prices and they have to cut their costs. And so this is all BS. The government has gotten the public to believe a lie that we need inflation, that we can't have falling prices. Look at Powell. Prices have to go up 2% every year, no matter how much they've already gone up. Like, even though we've just had this huge increase in price, we can't let prices fall. No. We just have to slow the rate of increase. Well, why can't they come back down? They went up so much. Oh, no, we can never have that. We can never let prices go down because that's going to be a disaster. It's like you tell people, well, okay, so food prices go down, college tuition goes down, healthcare costs go down, energy costs go down. You tell me that's a problem? The government has to protect me from that? The government has to make sure that all the things that I want and need get more expensive every year under the name of price stability? It's like, it's not even stable. At least initially, they wanted stable prices, which was prices that remained the same. Now they've redefined stability as go up 2% every year. But it's not even 2%. It's actually much more because the 2% is like some core number that excludes a lot of the stuff that I buy. And they rigged the whole basket. I mean, they say we need 2% inflation. We need higher inflation. Meanwhile, they're rigging the CPI to make it low, right? The inflation is actually causing prices to rise at least twice as much as the CPI. But because the CPI is rigged so heavily to come out with a low number, that's why they keep coming out with these low numbers. Oh, we need more inflation. But it's the government that needs inflation, not the public. That's how the government funds itself. That's how we pay for these deficits. That's the tax that nobody realizes they're paying. It's the one tax that they could blame on somebody else. We have a $2 trillion, $3 trillion budget. How are we paying? We have $7 trillion worth of government, and we have $5 trillion of tax revenue. Where's the government getting the other $2 trillion? Inflation, right? And we're paying for that. We're paying that tax in the form of higher prices. And that's unfortunately what Trump's going to do. Trump wants to cut taxes and not spending. And so where is the government going to get the money? Because the actual tax of government is spending. If the government is spending $7 trillion a year, it is taxing the economy $7 trillion. It is taking $7 trillion out of the economy and spending it. Now, how do we pay for it? If we don't pay for it with income taxes and sales taxes or tariffs, wherever it is, whatever the deficit is, we still have to pay for that. So the government has to borrow the money and take it out of the capital markets where it can no longer fund private sector investment, or the Fed does it and they print the money and prices just go up. So either prices go up, interest rates go up, but there's no free lunch. We have to pay for all the government we get one way or another. And the worst way to pay for it is with inflation. But politically, that's the most expedient. And so that's what happened. So they pulled off like a master plan in double speak. You know, Orwell would be very proud of the way the government was able to change the definition of inflation so that the public would have no idea who causes it, and to convince the public that rising prices are good and falling prices are bad.
Government needs to protect us from falling prices, rising prices, and the same prices, because then that's pooling and that's companies colluding. That's under every circumstance, they have an excuse. I have 3 more topics for us to go over. I want to read Richard Nixon's justification for why he got us off the gold standard. I would like you to respond. This is from RN, his memoirs. He says, the second week of August, the British ambassador appeared at the Treasury Department to ask that $3 billion be converted into gold. Whether we honored or denied this request, the consequences of our action would be fraught with danger. If we gave the British the gold they wanted, then other countries might rush to get theirs. If we refused, then that would be an admission that our concern that we could not meet every potential demand for conversion into gold. There was substantial disagreement on closing the gold window. In other words, suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. I decided to close the gold window and let the dollar float. As events unfolded, this decision turned out to be the best thing that came out of the whole economic program I announced on August 15th of 1971. What is your response to President Nixon?
Well, first of all, the dollar didn't float, it sank. Because when we went off the gold standard, well, the gold price was $35 an ounce. And they tried to devalue the dollar twice, and they ended up at about $42 an ounce when they closed the window. So you could buy an ounce of gold for $42. Now, even with the drop the last couple of days, you still need $2,600 to buy that same ounce of gold. So I wouldn't say that was a success. You know, in fact, if you go back to the hearings that they had on, removing gold convertibility for the dollar. And by the way, the actual definition of a dollar as defined by the Coinage Act of 1792, the dollar was defined as a weight of gold or silver. So that's actually what a dollar was. It wasn't a piece of paper. It was actually a quantity of gold or silver. But when they were, going to talk, when they talked about removing gold backing, you had like the Secretary of the Treasury, the Chairman of the Federal Reserve. They all testified, yeah, we should detach the dollar from gold. And their argument was that the dollar was propping up gold, and that if we could free the dollar from gold, the dollar would rise and gold would fall. My father actually testified, and he was the only people that said, no, it's going to be the opposite. And you're going to have price inflation, gold's going to go up. He said a dollar backed by nothing can't be better than a dollar backed by something. Which was true, and so everything that he said in his testimony stood the test of time. Everything the government experts said was completely wrong. But the reason that foreigners were trying to convert their Federal Reserve notes to actual money was that was the deal we made with the world. The world was on the gold standard, and we told the world, look, instead of having gold as your reserve, have dollars. Because you could get the gold whenever you want it. Just redeem it. It's $35 an ounce. In the meantime, you can take those dollars and loan them to us and buy our treasuries, and you'll get interest. So it's like a way, you give us your gold, you take these dollars, you loan them to us, we'll pay you interest, but you can have your gold whenever you want it. So it was a great deal for the world until we screwed them. They talk about, we've never defaulted. United States has never defaulted. We 100% defaulted on all those Federal Reserve notes. Because why do you think they're called notes, right? A note is a promise to pay. So we promised to pay foreigners gold if they had Federal Reserve notes. Well, when they tried to get their gold that we promised to pay, we defaulted. And we said, you can't have the gold. So we have a history of defaulting. But that was a significant thing, because once that happened, and gold went up to 850 pretty quickly, and the dollar tanked, gold, that's why oil prices went from $3 a barrel to $30 a barrel, right? It wasn't OPEC sticking it to us. We tried to stick it to OPEC. We tried to buy their oil with paper. We used to buy their oil with gold. And then we tried to pay paper. Well, you're going to pay paper. We need a lot more, and so the price went up. But what happened was Reagan came along and the inflation scare and rates went up. And then the world kind of went back, stayed on the dollar standard, even though it wasn't backed by gold, right? The original reason for Bretton Woods was the dollar's convertible to gold. This is as good as gold. And we sold the world on that and they bought it. We screwed them in 1971. But then by the 80s, they forgot about that. And they all right, let's stick with the dollar anyway. And then the US was like, wait a minute. So we could just print dollars? We don't have to have any gold. We can just keep printing dollars. It's like, imagine if you had a checkbook and you could just write checks and nobody ever tried to cash them. And once you realize that, I can buy whatever I want. It doesn't matter what I've got in a bank. And so we started flooding the world with our worthless IOUs and our whole economy changed. Hey, we don't have to make stuff anymore. Let the Chinese make it. Let them deal with the pollution. We'll just print some money and give it to them. And so all of our factories started shutting down and we started importing all the stuff we weren't producing and paying for it by printing money. It was like a great deal. And the world is doing all the hard work and they're just stockpiling our dollars, our paper money that we create for nothing. So we built up this whole service sector, phony economy. And now it's at this extreme level because of how long the dollar has been the reserve and how we've been able to build up economy that under normal circumstances could never survive. And if the dollar's reserve status goes, I mean, we collapse, like a house of cards because, we've never been more dependent on it than we are right now. And we have this massive debt and we need to keep borrowing more and more money to sustain it. Well, it's all in dollars. So people have to have confidence. They want to have to loan us all these dollars, even though we can't possibly repay the dollars we've already borrowed. All we can do is print more and destroy their value. And, the way our whole debt system works, nobody ever gets repaid anyway, because everything has to be rolled over. I mean, the only way we can make good on a treasury is if we can sell another one to somebody else. It's just a giant Ponzi scheme that has to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But, at some point, the world is going to be, okay, this isn't going to work. We don't want to play this game anymore because we know how it's going to end. And maybe Trump will accelerate that once this euphoria is gone and the $36 trillion debt quickly becomes 40 trillion, 45 trillion, 50 trillion. And it's like, okay, and we just keep printing money. The whole thing has got to implode. And that's going to be a very difficult adjustment process for the United States, because if we can no longer depend on the dollar's reserve status, that means we have to live within our means. That means we can't consume so much more than we produce. That means we can't borrow so much more than we save. But our whole economy is built on us doing that, right? And so what happens when you have to restructure that economy? When all the shopping centers have to shut down because there's nothing on the shelves. We can't keep shopping anymore because we don't make any of the stuff that was on those shelves. We have to start producing things again. Now, maybe it'll be easier with AI and robotics and stuff like that. I mean, hopefully that will be something that makes rebuilding the economy easier. But this whole artificial economy has to collapse in order for a real one to take its place. That's why it hasn't happened, because nobody wants to let the phony economy collapse, because so many people are enjoying the phony economy and so many people would be hurt if we allowed it to collapse. So we have to continue to sustain it. But the more we sustain it, the bigger the bubble gets and the more painful it ultimately is when it eventually collapses, which it always does.
Do you have time for 2 more topics?
Yep.
So modern monetary theory basically says, if I had to steelman it, Unlike a household, the state is a monetary sovereign who can print money. Thus, criticisms of too much government spending are irrelevant. With the state, we have the capacity for free college, free healthcare, free housing, free food, free appliances. By the state printing money and distributing the money to its citizens, what, if anything, is wrong with modern monetary theory? Say the debt gets to 50 or 60 trillion, then you just got to print that money. What is wrong with MMT in general?
Well, even the MMT say the problem with that is inflation, right? So they'll say it'll work until prices really start going up, and then the government has to withdraw the money. But yes, I mean, in theory, if you borrow in your own currency, you don't have to default. So can the U.S. government avoid defaulting on the debt? Yes, we can inflate instead of default. But then instead of telling our creditors you're not going to get your money back, we just tell them you're going to get your money, but you're not going to be able to buy anything with it. We're going to default on your purchasing power. If you print all that money and give it out, the money itself loses its value, right? Because there is no value in money, right? If it's not, if it was gold, okay, if money was gold, then money has actual value. I could do something with gold. But when you print money, when the government prints money and gives it to people, they haven't produced anything. So all you can do is take that paper and buy what's there. But the more paper I create, the higher the prices have to be, because there's no more stuff. There's just more paper looking to buy stuff. And so what the MMT people just overlook is, look, you get to a point where you destroy confidence in the money, because the government can't repay the bills in money of purchasing power, because it's not just about default. It is about inflation. If I get my money back and it doesn't buy anything, what good is it? Like if I loan you $1 million, I loan the government $1 million, and I could have taken that $1 million and bought a nice house with it. Maybe not in the great neighborhood, but I can still buy a house somewhere for $1 million. But I loan it to the government, and then there's massive inflation, and they pay me my $1 million back, and that's how much a pack of chewing gum costs. Does it really matter that I got my money back? Like the government didn't default because I loaned them a house and they gave me back a pack of gum, right? That's the reality. I mean, if they had defaulted, all right, so I'm out a pack of gum, big deal, right? What's the difference? But like, I actually think if the government did default, creditors would end up losing a lot less. I have been advocating for a while a restructuring of the debt. I mean, because the Fed kept interest rates so low for so long, we amassed a massive debt. And so now we have all this debt that we can't repay. And so in order to pretend we're solvent, the Fed keeps interest rates artificially low. But that just, exacerbates the damage that these artificially low interest rates continue to do to the economy. I say, let's let interest rates go up and then default. That's how we handle a debt we can't pay. We default. That's terrible. The U.S. government can't default. Well, sure, we did in 1971. We defaulted back then. But if we don't default, we're going to inflate, and that's worse. But the problem is, if the politicians default, you do that now, and it's going to be a mess. I'm not saying like if we default on treasuries, and I'm not talking about, hey, you own treasuries, you get nothing. Let's just say, okay, you own a treasury, it's $1. We're going to give you 30 cents instead of $1, whatever. But we have to reduce the debt to a level that we can afford to service at higher interest rates, right? So that the Fed can let rates go where they need to go, because we need higher interest rates to really, rebuild our savings and, start investing again and reindustrializing. But if we did that, there would definitely be a crisis, right? I mean, people would lose money. I mean, it would be pretty bad. So no politician wants to bring that on. Let's just keep printing money. Let's just, and so you delay it, but you make it worse. But the problem is that we talked about this earlier, the greed of government officials. People go to government not to, to help society. It's because that's the best job they can get. They want to enrich themselves, and they just chose politics. Now, sometimes there are some young people who are idealistic, and they go to Washington with these, grandiose goals of making a difference. But they quickly, give that up if they want to stay in Washington. Right? They have to play ball. They've got to, because if you don't do what you need to do to raise money to get reelected, you're not going to have a long career in politics. It's like all the honest people that actually want to help, they get weeded out, right, in government. The ones that are just selling their souls to the devil are the ones that rise to the top and can keep staying in office. So you got all these guys, they don't care about doing the right thing. The right thing for them is what will get me to the next election. And that is kicking the can down this road. So we're going to keep on creating inflation. We're going to keep making the problem bigger, because when it finally blows up, that's somebody else's problem, because I might have retired by then, And I was hoping that would have been different with Trump when he ran the first time, that he would have said, you know what, screw it. I'm going to do what's right for the country. I don't care. But no, he became a politician as soon as he was in office, and he was a great politician. That's why he just got elected again. He pandered to everybody. He made everybody promises, and now he's been elected.
Final question. Henry Hazlitt said something to the extent of, the good economist sees not only the initial effects of a policy on one group, but the long-term effects of a policy on multiple groups.
Yep.
If we take the case of tariffs, can you walk us through this economic understanding of how to see the downsides of tariffs, not as just saving jobs, but what are the secondary, tertiary effects of imposing tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, it's always the seen versus the unseen, and the government is always trying to benefit somebody to get votes. But in the process, they're damaging somebody else. They may not know it. They may not see it. Right. And, the classic example is Batiste and the broken window, right, where a kid throws a stone through a window, and now it creates a job for the window repairman, because now the guy that owns the house has to pay somebody to fix his window. And they say, look, see, there's a job, this window guy. So it's a good thing that the window broke, because it created a job for the window repairman. But what you don't see is, what was the homeowner going to do with the money if he didn't fix his window? Maybe he was going to go buy a pair of shoes with that money. But now he can't buy a pair of shoes because he's got to pay for his window. So now the shoemaker is out money. He's lost out. But the most important thing is, the guy would have had a window and a pair of shoes. Now he just has a window, right? Because he's paying to fix something. That's why all this stuff, a hurricane. Oh, that's going to be great for the economy because we have to rebuild. Well, it would have been better for the economy if we didn't have to rebuild. We could have done something else with the money instead of replacing what we already had. So there is no, silver lining to these dark clouds. It's just a dark cloud. We have to tough it up and deal with it. Now, with when it comes to tariffs, tariffs are very different, because you put the tariff on and you immediately get higher prices. So it's like the public generally doesn't like tariffs, but Trump has been able to sell the public on tariffs by claiming that they're not going to pay them, that China's going to pay the tariffs. China doesn't pay the tariffs. Just like when you have a sales tax, the store doesn't pay the sales tax. You pay it. They add it to the price of the goods. So when somebody imports something and they have to pay a tariff, they just stick it onto the price. The customer pays all of the tariffs. Now, are some people winners from tariffs? Yes. There's always winners. That's why the government imposed tariffs. So let's say I put a tariff on foreign automobiles coming in. Well, if I'm a U.S. automobile company, well, that's a plus for me, because I have less competition. I could charge higher prices. If I'm an auto worker, my company now can charge higher prices because those cheap foreign cars are being brought out. We can get higher wages. So the people who work in the protected industry, because that's what the tariff is doing, it's protecting an industry from competition. In the short run, they benefit because they have less competition. Now, in the long run, it actually end up harming them. But in the short run, they don't have to innovate as much. They can be lazier, and they can make more money. But who are the losers? Well, obviously, everybody who wants to buy a car has to pay a higher price now, right? Whether they buy the import and pay the tariff, or whether they buy the more expensive domestic car that is now more expensive because it doesn't have as much foreign competition. So the consumers are worse off. But now, okay, like with the broken window, cars are now more expensive. I have to spend more money to buy a car. Well, I don't have an unlimited amount of money. So I have less money to buy something else. So some other industry is now going to suffer because I don't have as much money to patronize their business or buy their products because I've been forced by the tariffs to pay more money to buy a car. So the politicians and the public, they can see the auto workers. Hey, they're really happy. Look, these tariffs, I'm getting more money. The union, they can make donations to the campaigns and, you know, they get benefit. But all the other businesses that have suffered because everybody has to pay more for cars, they don't really make the connection to the tariffs. And they're not an organized political unit that's now going to raise a lot of money. So it's the people that benefit from a government program are usually few in number, but they're highly motivated, and so they'll reward the politicians. The people who suffer, it's you know, dispersed over a broad population. I mean, look at the Jones Act. I mean, what an asinine act that makes everything, almost everything in the country more expensive because it costs so much money to ship stuff by boat. Because in order, the Jones Act says that if you want to ship something from one U.S. port to another U.S. port, it has to be on a U.S. built ship owned by a U.S. company, crewed by U.S. workers. Well, first of all, we don't even build ships really anymore. So it's even hard to find. The Jones Act ships are really old. And the American crews are a fortune. I mean, most American companies, you ever go on a cruise ship, there's no Americans working on those cruise ships. If Americans were working on cruise ships, no one could afford to take a cruise. You see how many people are on those boats? If they had to pay them, you know, the union wages, you couldn't, nobody can go on a cruise. Only the rich could go on a cruise. But so they have this Jones Act. And here I'm in Puerto Rico. Everything costs a fortune here because it has to come from the mainland on a U.S. ship. Now, like, let's say there's a boat that's going from Europe to the U.S. It can't stop in Puerto Rico and unload stuff and then continue to the U.S. It has to go all the way to the U.S., unload stuff, and then the stuff that goes to Puerto Rico has to be put back on another ship and sent back to Puerto Rico. Even though it could have just been dropped off on the way on a much cheaper ship, it's got to be put in a Jones Act. So everything, Hawaii really gets killed by the Jones Act. But there's a lot of things that could be transported up and down like the Eastern Seaboard that instead is put on trucks, right? It would be much more efficient to put it on boats, but not if you have to use a Jones Act boat. So a lot of stuff is on the roads, polluting the roads, carbon emit, a boat is pretty clean. That, these big boats don't pollute that much. They don't use, their carbon footprint is a lot lower than all these little trucks going around on the highways. So we have this ridiculous Jones Act, been around for like 100 years. Why? I mean, why do we have it? Because there's a small group of people who make an insane amount of money from that Jones Act. Now, what they make pales in comparison to what the country loses, but nobody will get rid of them because they are donated. Even Donald Trump. I remember when Hurricane Maria hit, he was thinking of a temporary waiver so boats could bring emergency supplies to Puerto Rico. The Jones Act guys came in and they said, no, absolutely not. And they convinced Donald Trump that even in an emergency where people are suffering, we're not going to let any boats come into Puerto Rico because they were afraid of the camel's nose under the tent. We have a temporary waiver this, we'll have another waiver, and pretty soon we'll get rid of the whole thing. So they swooped down, and Donald Trump caved in because other senators came and said, look, these are our big donors. We've got to do what they want, right? This is the factions that the founding fathers tried to protect us from with the American Republic. But that's the unseen, right? The guys that benefit from the Jones Act, they see these massive benefits, and they're willing to pay big bucks to the government to preserve that windfall. But all the consumers all over the country who maybe end up annually paying an extra $500 to $1,000 for everything they consume, they don't even know. They have no idea how much money they're losing. But also the things on the tariffs too, what people don't realize is, okay, we're going to protect, American industries and have all these different tariffs. But a lot of our companies also export. And if we make a lot of their components more expensive on the way in, they're more expensive on the way out, unless we rebate all those tariffs. It ends up harming a lot of companies. And again, Trump thinks that, well, the Chinese, they're just going to suck it up and they're going to pay the tariffs and they're not going to raise prices. That is ridiculous. I mean, let's say a Chinese company is making a 20% margin selling Americans widgets, whatever it is. If we put a 30% tariff on it, they're not going to just say, well, we're going to keep the prices the same. We're just going to lose $10 on everything that we sell. Why would they do that? They're not in business to lose money. They're going to raise the prices. And they, right now they just can't jack up prices because of competition. But if we impose the tariffs, then everybody jacks up prices, right? You take away the competition because everybody has to charge it. Now, yes, if we target the tariff to China, well, maybe we'll buy from Vietnam. Maybe we'll buy, from India, right? But why aren't we buying from India now? Well, because China's giving us a better deal. And so if tariffs make Chinese products more expensive and we buy Indian products instead that are more expensive than what the Chinese products used to be, but less expensive than they are now, right? We still lose, and the government doesn't even collect any money. But then a lot of times what happens is, so China ends up shipping its stuff to India, and then India repackages and ships it to us. We end up buying the Chinese stuff anyway, but we just pay more money for it. So look, none of this stuff works. The only thing that works is free market capitalism. And to have the maximum benefit for free market capitalism, you want to have the smallest government possible. And then you can have the least amount of tax possible, because taxes are always going to damage the economy, no matter how. So that's why you want to keep taxes to a minimum. But that means you have to keep government to a minimum, because if you just finance government with inflation and debt, it's worse than taxes. That's why before we had the income tax, government was tiny, because you couldn't finance a big government on tariffs and, and taxes on liquor and tobacco, right? I mean, there's only so much, right? And if you raise the taxes too high, people aren't going to use the products, right? Or they'll set up a still in their backyard. They're not going to buy they'll make it themselves. But the income tax, you're stuck. They take it right out of your paycheck. Doesn't matter how high it is. You're stuck paying it. And so once they got a direct line to our pockets, they started coming up with all these government programs to spend all that money on. But the problem is, as much money as they took, they spent more. And that's because they could print it, and we had the reserve currency, and so we could pile up all this debt. And it's not just the funded debt. The unfunded liabilities are hundreds of trillions of dollars that we're on the hook for.
Thank you to everyone for watching Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone and the Libertarian Institute. Check out Schiff Gold and Euro Pacific Capital in the comments below. Mr. Schiff, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Keep up the good work. Keep on spreading liberty and free markets. That's the best part about the internet, is we can get these free market ideas out and bypass the mainstream media, which is extremely left wing.